Hello everyone and welcome to Ovarian Cancer Australia's Information and Support webinar. My name is Vanessa Alford. I'm part of the support team at OCA. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're on and pay my respect to elders past, present and future. This webinar will talk about the grief and uncertainty experienced by women following an ovarian cancer diagnosis and provide some suggestions for managing these feelings. We have three incredible presenters who are going to share some valuable information with you. The webinar is interactive, so over the next hour, you can ask questions to the presenters by using the dark blue hand icon at the top of your screen. Questions will be answered at the end of each speaker's presentation. Please note that presenters cannot address individual medical cases. If you have a particular question, please call the Ovarian Cancer Australia Information and Support line on 1300 660 334. For technical assistance during the webinar, please phone Redback Support on 1800 733 416. So I'm extremely privileged to introduce our speakers to you. Our first speaker is Angela Jones, a qualified social worker who is part of the support team at Ovarian Cancer Australia and has worked for over 15 years in various settings, including palliative care, hospitals, and community settings. Angela will be speaking about the grief and the loss women face following an ovarian cancer diagnosis, including the impact on their career and relationships and their loss of independence and future aspirations. Our second speaker is Dr. Charlotte Topman, a clinical psychologist specialising in the treatment of cancer-related distress. Charlotte works with cancer patients and their family members and carers at all stages of the cancer experience. Charlotte will speak about the uncertainty experienced by women following an ovarian cancer diagnosis. And we'll also hear from Andrea Leslie, who was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer in 2017, 6 years after her husband passed away from brain cancer. Andrea will share some of her experiences of grief and uncertainty both as a carer and since her diagnosis, and some of the coping strategies she finds useful. So it is now my pleasure to hand the microphone over to Angela Jones. Thanks, Angela.
Thank you, Vanessa. Look, I'm really privileged to have this opportunity tonight to talk to you a little bit about grief and loss for women who have ovarian cancer. I guess what I'll be talking about tonight is really about women who are living with ovarian cancer. So thank you for the opportunity. Just to provide an overview, so I'll just talk about what grief and loss is, how women experience grief, talk about the dual process model for coping, post-traumatic growth, and things that help when you are grieving the losses you're experiencing. So just to give a little background about what grief and loss actually is. And grief is our response to loss. It's normal, natural, and inevitable response to loss. It can affect every part of your life, and it is varied and different to every person. So the reason that it's varied is because of everyone is quite different. Every woman has a different personality, different attachment styles they would have had growing up, different types of resilience. So some women may be more resilient than others. Their communication style will also impact how varied it might be, as well as the developmental stage. So for a woman who's 18 diagnosed with ovarian cancer is vastly different to someone who may be 70 years of age, as an example. I think also cultural backgrounds is completely different, the way that you, experience your grief. So I'm just going to, over the next 5 slides, talk about some of the losses that I have noticed when I speak with women in my role as a social worker here at Ovarian Cancer. And these are what I'm drawing on is the examples that women talk to me about through counselling. So probably a really significant aspect is a loss of femininity and womanhood. So women often talk about losing their female reproductive organs, just what that impact is for them, you know, the losses of that for them, how it makes them feel, that they feel less of a woman, less, you know, the choice of having a child has been taken away from them, losing, those dreams and hopes of having a child. It can change the way you feel about sexuality. It can, so some women do talk about feeling less desirable, less able to have sex comfortably because they might be really fatigued and not feel so energized about having sex with their partner. There's a lot of hormonal changes, so women do experience night sweats or changes in their mood. The medications can alter whilst they're undergoing menopause. So that can really impact the woman, and, you know, also a loss of sex drive can also occur. The loss of physical appearance is another aspect of loss that women talk about. So I just chose this photo. As you can see, there's a woman who's standing out with the white, and a lot of women do talk about feeling like they stand out. They notice their scars on their stomach or their ports that are in their, you know, upper chest that might protrude. So they feel that loss of who they are beforehand. A loss of body function. So a woman who's got is adjusting to having an ileostomy bag or a colonoscopy bag. How is that for her? How does she feel about that? So they're quite significant for a lot of women. And the loss of hair and eyelashes and eyebrow, that's often discussed from most women because they feel that they do stand out, that people notice them. So they go to pick up their children from school, they feel that people are looking at them. You know, the eyelashes, you know, that loss of beauty that women have a sense they feel is lost for them. A lot of women do talk about a loss of body strength because there may have been someone who, you know, used to run, or someone who went to CrossFit, and, you know, at the moment they're not able to if they're undergoing treatment. Their body's letting them down a little bit. So it's quite an area of loss that women talk about. And with these areas of loss that I've divided up, there is some overlap with each other, and there will be things that will stand out to you as you're watching this. A lot of women do talk about the loss of work, and that can be a really difficult and complex issue because you're losing, you know, trying to juggle employment and family obligations. So if you're at the moment with our COVID situation doing some homeschooling or trying to take your children to activities after school, it can be pretty challenging if you're undergoing treatment and you're required to be perhaps at an outpatient clinic for the day. It's pretty tough to continue to work in your usual role. So a lot of women, you know, try to work out what's the best thing for themselves to do. They lose the contact with work colleagues. So that can be a part of, you know, that loss of not being able to chat with your workmates, being able to have lunch with them. So it can, you know, make women feel quite isolated. And certainly there's a lot of women experience a loss of income, and you know, it impacts the entire family. If they are partnered with someone, they lose a lot of their income. And also they may be, you know, having to access income protection, which is a reduced amount of income, and women find that pretty tough to manage. It can also be that women decide, well, maybe I'm not going to work anymore. I'm going to lose that career that I had hoped for, that I dreamed of, that promotion that I was hoping to achieve. I think with the financial as well, it's quite often underestimated, the costs of having treatment-related costs that could include medications, it can include travel, because I think, you know, a lot of our work is from across Australia, so there are rural patients of ours that are travelling 5 hours that may, you know, need to stay overnight, so there's accommodation costs. There's costs for complementary therapy. And I think this is quite significant, the loss of dreams and hopes that can be relevant to every woman. It is definitely relevant to every woman and varies according to their age what that might be. So someone who's perhaps in their early 20s or early 30s may have had the dream of travelling, and that becomes interrupted because of treatment demands, and that they can't continue that. Some other women might be, let's say, in their late 30s wanting to go on a girls' weekend away. They might be suffering from fatigue, so they can't follow that dream. Loss of retirement dreams. So it could be, again, travel or just escaping the colder weather in, say, Melbourne, where I am tonight. It could be whatever you're hoping to do in retirement, whether it's voluntary work that gets interrupted. Loss of parenting, it's an issue that comes up a lot for women because they're not able to have children, so that loss of becoming a parent is taken away. Loss of relationships is another area that a lot of women talk about, which is again related to this treatment demand that interferes with your opportunity to socialise like you may have. And the same example of the schoolyard drop-off, you might socialise with women when you're dropping your children off, but that can be taken away. So it's a loss of that relationship, say in the school setting, or women that might go for walks with their friends, but that's interrupted because of, again, treatment demands or surgeries or recovery from surgery. I think there's been a loss of community since COVID for a lot of our women who may have been diagnosed during COVID and have lost that social and have become socially isolated because of COVID. But I think it's also relatable to when, you know, a woman is diagnosed, that they can feel that sense of isolation as well. I think changes in your own relationship with your partner, that can change, where women can feel less desirable, less healthy, so that they think that perhaps their partner no longer wishes to be with them anymore. A loss of friendships. Friendships drop off. People lose that connectedness with a woman who has ovarian cancer. And loneliness. A lot of women experience that. I think there's a loss of anticipated future relationships. Will I be able to have a relationship? Do I feel comfortable enough about my own body now that it's changed? A loss of dreams as well for your future relationship. And I guess all of these losses I'm talking about may not apply to everyone. Some might. So I'm hoping that tonight some of this you can, you know, helps normalise what you may be experiencing. And when we talk about experiences of grief, these are just some of the ways that women experience grief. A high portion are experiencing anxiety, some depression, some social withdrawal. So some women may, you know, choose to withdraw a bit because in order to cope. Might be fatigue, might sort of take away your opportunities. So that's how women do experience grief. Avoiding is a really common thing, and definitely feelings of sadness and unhappiness. And some women cry. There is a lot of preoccupation of thoughts about your disease, and definitely feeling your body has let you down. So these are some examples. There are others. The dual process model for coping is a really helpful model to help women adjust to some painful thoughts they may be experiencing, thoughts and feelings, as well as creating a rich and meaningful life. So what this model is it's divided up into the two sections. So one side is the grief orientation, and I've just filled in some of those points that are relevant, but you can make up your own. So it can be that you perhaps cry, you feel sad, you have that preoccupation of your thoughts about your disease, you talk about your disease excessively, you might withdraw and just, want to close the curtains and stay inside, and you might also have some avoidance about your disease. And on the other side is a restoration orientation. So that's doing new things. So could be someone who's taking up a photography course, trying some voluntary work, attending to some new activity like Tai Chi or yoga or exercise class, or socialising with new women that you may meet. Living in the moment, I think, is really important, and distraction. So in order to cope, women need to oscillate between the two. So see the arrows that are going crisscross? That's a way that we know that women cope, is if they can spend some time on the grief orientation and then some time on the restoration in order to cope. Because we know that you can't just totally ignore the feelings and thoughts that you may have about your diagnosis, but we also know that it's helpful to restore life and live really well. What a lot of women actually experience as well is post-traumatic growth. And that can be through a stressful event in your life, such as a cancer diagnosis, where you can actually enrich relationships, you can enrich your life so that it has new and more meaning in it. So I just thought it might be good for you to think about yourself and consider what type of person you were before your diagnosis and what you think you might be now. And just if you can maybe ask that question of yourself in your own time. So since I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, I have become, could be a better partner, it could be I've enriched my relationships with my extended family, just anything that comes to mind that you would know that you've experienced through this difficult situation. What we know helps is talking with your loved ones or your healthcare team. Counselling can help. Attend to your own self-care and find ways to relax. So we know these are the basic things that often get missed, exercise, diet, relaxation, visualisation, so taking yourself to a place that you really love, thinking about that place, mindfulness, meditation, always having good sleep if you can, having a relaxation massage if you can, and definitely being in nature helps people. Whoops. Sorry, just a few more things that do help is having things to look forward to. So planning some new activities or new adventures, going on a picnic with your family, learning something new, peer support groups. And Ovarian Cancer Australia has 8 at the moment. Cancer Council also has a lot of support groups in each state. Online resources are also helpful. And I've just put a link there to Cancer Council Victoria, who has some relaxation that you can do online. Online booklets are also another helpful source, because not everyone wants to talk to a counsellor. I think if you notice something becomes quite significant for you or concerning, it's always helpful to go to a GP and have a checkup, and if you need a mental health plan to give you a discounted counselling, that would be helpful. And then a referral to a therapist that is a counsellor, psychologist. And that's over to you now.
Thank you very much, Angela, for providing us with that valuable information and such great advice. We just have one question from our audience. It is, I worry about my kids because I feel like I'm thinking about my disease all the time, and I find it really hard to be upbeat in front of them all the time. So is there anything I can do to protect them so that they don't worry unnecessarily?
Okay, it's quite common that women can become a bit preoccupied with their thoughts and feel quite distracted. I think it's good if you can think back to the dual process model and not spend the time over on the loss orientation, so the left side of that model, and move across to the other side. And definitely a lot of reassurance and a lot of honest and open conversations with children will help, because they are often listening in or taking notice, and they're very aware, so they do kind of make their own assumptions when they're not informed enough. So it's better to inform them as much as you can. Thank you.
Great advice. Thank you, Angela. Thanks again for joining us on this webinar tonight. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd now like to hand over to our second speaker, Dr. Charlotte Topman. Thanks, Charlotte.
Thanks very much, Vanessa. My name's Dr. Charlotte Topman. I'm a clinical psychologist. I specialise in cancer-related distress. I'm going to talk to you tonight about living with uncertainty and fear of cancer recurrence, two pretty big subjects. They're my contact details if anybody wants to get in touch with me. I live in Adelaide in South Australia, but I am very available to people if they want to reach out for any reason. Whoops. So the technical name for my job is a psycho-oncologist, which really just means I'm a cancer-related distressed clinical psychologist. And tonight I'm going to talk to you from three perspectives: from the theory, from my clinical practice, and also from my personal experience. My mum died of ovarian cancer when I was in my 20s. I'm 57 now. And I was diagnosed with breast cancer 3 years ago. So whilst obviously my lived experience isn't that of ovarian cancer, I do know what it's like to sit on the other side of the desk as the patient in the cancer world, as well as being on my side of the desk. Oh, why is my arrow not behaving? There we go. So just before I go any further, sometimes when I'm presenting, you know, we talk about some pretty meaty stuff, and it can be triggering for people. So if you feel at the end of tonight that it's raised issues for you, or it's triggered some stuff that that's making you feel a bit rattled, then I really encourage you to reach out to someone that you trust to just debrief and just have a talk about how you're feeling and what you might be thinking, just to settle that rattled feeling down. So, living with uncertainty. Why is it tricky? Oh, my jolly mouse. Sorry, my mouse is just not being cooperative. There we go. So what is uncertainty? Uncertainty is not knowing. It's a lack of control. And in the ovarian cancer space, it can be uncertainty of onset of any cancer recurrence. It can be uncertainty of the onset and duration of any cancer progression, so the disease going further, and the uncertainty of the timing and the nature of outcome, so what might happen to us. Human beings don't do well with uncertainty, and that's one of the reasons that the whole human race has struggled so much with the events of the last 2 years with coronavirus, because it's left us all sitting in a puddle of uncertainty. None of us have really known what the future will hold, and we don't do well with it. Sorry. Certainty is what we like, and the reason that we like it is because it gives us a sense of predictability, it gives us perceptions of control, and that makes us feel safe. So you can really appreciate that there's a big difference between certainty and uncertainty, and it's very understandable why we would prefer certainty. And an ovarian cancer diagnosis introduces a whole lot of unpredictability. It takes away that feeling of like being in control of your life. A whole lot of stuff spirals out of control, and that leaves us feeling really vulnerable and really unsafe. We know that anxiety rises in relation to uncertainty, also to the unfamiliar and the unknown. So uncertainty provokes anxiety, makes us feel really fearful, really scared. So the sorts of things that can be helpful in living with uncertainty, because we can't make our future certain, are to actually increase the perceptions of control. So perception is just thoughts, okay? So the idea that if I perceive that I'm more in control of things, that's going to help me, that's going to make me feel better. And so often we see with women, when people are really stressed, and it doesn't have to be just about cancer, but when people are really stressed, women often resort to things like cleaning and organising, and men resort to things like fixing and mending in the shed. And even though that looks like sort of like a stereotypical gender behaviour, what it's really about is controlling your immediate environment, and that increases your perception of control. So it's a really what we call adaptive coping strategy. It makes sense and it makes you feel better. So what might seem like sort of like nesting, or to family members might seem like, oh God, like why is mum, you know, cleaning out the Tupperware cupboard again? It's actually because it makes us feel better, more in control. So another way to do that is to identify and work towards short-term achievable goals. And this is about, again, making you feel like you're in control. And the idea that they need to be short-term and achievable is, it's almost like you want to be able to see the end of the project or the goal in your mind's eye before you start it. So it's something that you can complete maybe within something like a month. It feels very doable. It doesn't feel daunting and overwhelming from the beginning. And the great thing about setting goals and then working towards them is it reduces the feeling of being sort of stuck. It lets us feel like we're making progress, we're moving forward, and that's really helpful in dealing with uncertainty. The other thing is that in terms of setting the type of goal that might work for you, if we choose something too big, then the risk is that we set ourselves up for messages of failure and disappointment, and that's obviously unhelpful. So things like a small project, it might be something creative like knitting a scarf or a jumper. It might be writing a small blog or a reflection on your experience. It might be learning to cook a new dish. It might be something really, it might sound small, but the fact that you set it, you can see the end of it before you start, means that what you're doing is you're setting yourself up for success. You're giving yourself the best chance of a successful outcome. So that's, again, short-term goals, projects, activities, events, and it can be anything, and it's very individual. You know, what works for one person might not work for another, and it's very much about kind of what has value and meaning for you. And again, mini versus maxi, so small versus big, and something that's enjoyable and has meaning for you. So if you're the sort of person who likes the outdoors, likes nature, likes connecting with the environment, then something in the garden might work for you. If you're the sort of person who likes movies, it might be that you want to watch a whole series that you've never actually watched before. So it's very much about what works for you. It's about identifying the things that you can control and focusing on them rather than on the things that you can't. One of the things that something like an ovarian cancer diagnosis sets up is a whole lot of big stuff that is outside our control. What's the disease going to do? What treatment am I going to have? How am I going to respond? Is it going to work? All of those big questions that are not within our control. And so sometimes it can be really helpful to acknowledge that that stuff is there, that it's outside our control, but to bring our attention back to the things that we can control, our immediate environment, things that are enjoyable and have purpose and meaning for us. Another really helpful thing is, and Angela said this before, is about being in the moment. And the reason that this is helpful is because when we are focused on things like fear and dealing with uncertainty, feeling overwhelmed, we're often in our head and we're thinking a lot. And if we bring ourselves into the moment, into the present, what it does is it brings us out of our head. And our 5 senses are really useful for this. Our 5 senses are very underutilised generally. So this is what you can see, what you can hear, what you can smell, what you can taste, and what you can touch. And if you can do something to activate any of those senses, what you will find is that it will bring you back into the present and out of your head. So for example, I really like fresh herbs. If I get a bunch of fresh basil and shove it under my nose, it will instantly bring me very much into the present. It will take me away from whatever I'm thinking about, and it will bring me into the present and make me really appreciate and be paying attention to the sense that has been stimulated. So you can do that in a whole variety of ways. You know, with hearing, it might be music. With touch, it might be gardening. With smell and taste, it might be cooking. Again, gardening, all those sorts of things. And it doesn't have to be big, but it can be a really powerful strategy. The other thing that's good about this is it's simple. And the reason that simple is good is that when we're feeling distressed, complicated doesn't work. Your brain isn't going to enjoy complicated. It's not going to engage with complicated. And so you want something that's simple and quick. And your 5 senses are very helpful in that regard. The other thing is mindfulness meditation. Again, Angela touched on that. Very helpful. And the reason that this is so helpful is that when your brain is engaged in mindfulness meditation, it's kind of like a car being in neutral or idle. It's still working, but it's just sort of sitting there in a neutral space. And in terms of the way that mindfulness meditation works, you produce these particular brain waves called alpha waves. And what that does is it actually allows your brain to sort of, we call it, it's a whole lot of technical stuff, but it's like it makes loose associations. So you can still think, you can still operate, but your brain is not in the mode of being able to focus and obsess on specific problems. And so it takes it into this sort of safe space. It's the same space that your brain goes into in the zone just before sleep. It's a really helpful place for your brain to spend some time, and it de-arouses your whole system. So things like mindfulness meditation can be really helpful in managing uncertainty. Reducing the question marks. One of the things that living with an ovarian cancer diagnosis can do is it can set up a whole lot of fear around things like what might happen to me, what might happen to my belongings, my estate, what might happen to the people that I care about, and what might happen in terms of my actual health care if the disease progresses or recurs. And whilst it can be really confronting to address some of this stuff, if we don't address it, it's kind of like the question marks just sit unanswered in your brain. And so it can be really helpful to actually take action around the things you can. And if there are issues that you feel strongly about, that you want resolved or you want communicated to others, it's about actually communicating them, identifying them, possibly documenting them, and then setting that stuff aside, knowing that it's now taken care of, so that if things do progress, those questions aren't question marks in your mind anymore. They're actually sorted. Oof. On to fear of recurrence. So fear of recurrence is the fear that the cancer will come back, and it relates also in a cancer like ovarian cancer to fear of disease progression, which is the fear of the disease progressing further. It's really common and it's really normal. The recent research around this suggests that between 70 and 99% of people who've had a cancer experience have fear of cancer recurrence. So it's really unpleasant, but it's really common and therefore normal. There are lots of triggers. These are the main ones. So there's usually a trigger around diagnosis. Every time we start a new treatment phase, there's a trigger as well. Will this work? Will the cancer come back? Will the cancer progress? The diagnosis or death of a family member or friend brings it all back. Media stories might be about research, might be about a high-profile person, but it's enough to make us remember our situation. Medical review appointments, physical symptoms, and anniversaries of our diagnosis date. Review anxiety is a particularly nasty one around fear of recurrence. And in the 2 weeks leading up to the review, usually we feel really quite anxious. And the period between having some tests that might be, say, bloods and scans and waiting for those results is absolutely unspeakable. And this is a really tricky one as a psychologist. When I talk to people about it, I say to them, it's almost like when you come out of that results appointment, it's like a balloon gets pricked and you feel all of that fear just dissipate. And frankly, even if the review results aren't good, knowing and having some certainty is better than not knowing. Sometimes people want fear of recurrence to go away, and what I say to them is, A, that's not possible because it's a really normal thing. This is an existential threat. This is something that we are really scared might take our life, might limit our life. So it's a really normal thing. And we don't want to actually turn off your threat system. It's your internal burglar alarm. What happens if you turn off your burglar alarm or you disable your burglar alarm? You're vulnerable. So I say to people, what we really want is we want Goldilocks fear. Not so much that it paralyses you and not so little that you're more vulnerable, because having a level of fear keeps you vigilant. It keeps you going to your medical appointment, focused on good, healthy lifestyle behaviours, making sure that if there are physical symptoms, you appropriately monitor them and check them. There's a fear exercise I get people to do, which is about turning their fear into an object. And it's about thinking about, if you have a fear of recurrence, what colour is it? What shape is it? What's it made of? How big is it? How heavy is it? Can you see through it? What texture is it? Does it move if you try and push it? Sometimes being able to turn it into an object means that you can set it aside in your mind's eye. My fear of recurrence is like a small metal silver fist. You might like to try that exercise. And the one thing that's really common with fear of recurrence is the interpretation of physical symptoms. And I say to my clients, if there's one thing that you can do to try and reduce the strength of this fear, it's about coming up with 2 other explanations for the physical symptom. So I never say, we never dismiss a physical symptom that it could be cancer, that it could be a recurrence. It's about going, okay, it could be that. What else could it be? Are there other explanations? So, for example, if I get a headache, I can think, oh my goodness, that's brain mets. But then I say to myself, all right, well, what else could it be? Could I be dehydrated? Could I be stressed and tired? And then it's about spreading, because if we come up with more than one explanation, we spread our fear, we dilute it. And then it's about sensibly monitoring that symptom. And if it doesn't settle down and it doesn't go away, getting it investigated. But it is about challenging that instant first thought is the worst thought. And the other thing you can do with fear of recurrence is you can use it as a motivator. And that's where it's really helpful, I think, to be able to go, okay, well, if I can't get rid of this, can I make it work for me? And if I can make it work for me, how do I do that? And I can use my fear to engage in healthy behaviours. So things like paying attention to sleep, paying attention to exercise, paying attention to nutrition. And then to use it as a motivator to live my life consistent with my values. Exercise is so helpful for this stuff. It improves everything. Mood, it reduces risk of recurrence, helps you sleep, and improves your stamina. And if you're feeling like you want some support to help you deal with the types of things that I've discussed tonight, empathetic others, really important. Empathy is gold. Your GP, as Angela mentioned, and maybe a therapist. That's all from me. Back to you, Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, for that extremely valuable presentation. You've provided the audience with so many useful strategies to help them cope with their uncertainty. So thank you. We have a couple of questions from the audience. One is, how do I stop my mind from going to the darkest places?
Yeah, this is something that crops up in therapy a lot, and without wanting to sound in any way glib, I say to my clients, it is a place to visit, it's just not a place to live. So it's okay to go to that dark place. It's okay to really confront some of those really challenging mortality thoughts. I don't think in Western culture we do death and dying very well. And I talk about death and dying a lot in my practice because I think it is really important to give people space to actually talk about, think about, let themselves feel the sorts of very big, heavy thoughts and feelings around mortality. So it's not about trying to stop it. It's about recognising that this is a normal thing when you're confronted with something like an existential threat, but it is a place to visit, not to live there.
Thank you. And one more question. If I'm hopeful about my future, does that mean that I'm in denial?
So I think that if somebody is asking that question of themselves or say to someone like me, the fact that they're even asking the question is indicative of the fact that they're not in denial because they're really expressing something that's reflecting how serious the situation is and how aware they are of that. When I talk about denial, it is an extreme form of avoidance, which is often a maladaptive coping strategy, which means it's not a helpful coping strategy. And denial is really problematic in the cancer world because just because we might deny something doesn't actually mean that it isn't real and happening. And inevitably, the physical situation, the treatment situation, the perhaps recurrence or progression of disease means that we have to confront the reality. And if we've been in denial, it's like we've taken our optimism to a dangerous place. I talk about optimism as realistic and unrealistic optimism. So realistic optimism is hope and unrealistic optimism is denial.
It's a great way of putting it. Thank you. Thanks so much again, Charlotte. I really appreciate you giving up your time in the evening.
That's my pleasure.
Thank you. I'm sure everyone benefited enormously. I would like to now hand over to our final speaker, Andrea Leslie. Thank you, Andrea.
Good evening, everyone. Grief and uncertainty have been with me and probably with you for the whole of your life. But certainly when I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, they became my constant companions. And lest you think that I'm going to talk to you about a life of doom and gloom after my ovarian cancer diagnosis, let me assure you that these past few years, I have experienced so many other good things: love, affection, joy, beauty, so many things. And so it's not just doom and gloom. So let me tell you a little bit about my story. I was away overseas on a wonderful holiday. I came back and suddenly I started getting tummy aches as usual. And it just kept coming and I thought, oh my goodness, I've been into strange places, maybe I've caught something. So I went to see the doctor. And so we were testing for strange diseases that I might have caught. And at the same time, I was putting on weight. In fact, my weight became a real issue for me because it came on so quickly and I was getting embarrassed. Here I was, a lady of 68, and I was beginning to look like I was 5 months pregnant, and I was beginning to look at my wardrobe very carefully just in order to hide my shape a little. However, nothing could be found, and it just got worse. And then one evening in 2017, at the beginning of February, I could take the pain no longer. I felt I was about to burst. And I went to a local hospital here in Hornsby. And I said to the lovely doctor, young doctor, look, I've been overseas to a very, a place where I could have caught all sorts of things. I just want you to be aware of that. I don't want to pass this illness on to anyone. And to her credit, and she was so diplomatic, she said to me, I will take that into consideration, but your symptoms could be symptomatic of, and she rattled off a few diseases, and amongst them was cancer. And I, in my stupidity, thought, excuse me, I thought, well, that's the one thing I won't have. No one in my side of the family has ever had cancer. It won't be me. Well, you can guess what happened. I got it. Once it was fully diagnosed and I was still in hospital, a lovely doctor appeared before me, a lovely lady doctor, surrounded by her bevy of young doctors. And I said to her, because I have had some experience with cancer, in fact, I shall tell you a little bit about it. My husband died from a very aggressive brain cancer. And at the time, I was the carer. And I think it's helpful to know what a carer might go through. And as a carer, I not only was losing the person I loved, but I was also losing my life. My husband knew what was happening to him. He had cancer. He had a short time. He was going to die. I was going to be left behind. I was losing my life because my life as we knew it was passing. He was no longer going to be the focal point of my life. I was going out into the unknown. And that was quite scary too. So if you have a wonderful carer, bear that in mind and give them credit for all the hard work that they do on your behalf and how unstintingly they work and make your time good. However, when this doctor came, I thought, right, I'm not going through all this malarkey. I said to her, look, I want the honest truth. If I've got a short time, I'm not going to scream and cry. I just want to know because I want to plan my life. I really needed that control, I think. And I said, look, I'm going to Switzerland. This is the end of my life. If that's what has to happen, that's what will happen. And she looked at me and she sat down beside me and she pulled up the computer and she said, let us look at your scans. And I just had the PET scan. She went through every single tumor that I had. She showed me what I had. She spoke about what was ahead of me, the treatments I was to have. I was so grateful. She spoke in such a relaxed, even measure. No, oh, you poor dear, or anything like that, because I would have cried. And then at the end of it all, she stood up and she said to me, well, as for your question, I will be honest with you. I'm not a magician. I do not have a crystal ball, but judging by what I see, I think your life can be measured in years, not weeks. And that was quite astounding for me. I was quite surprised because I was going to get out of all this mess. I was not going to be part and parcel of chemo and all the rest of it. And then she added a further thing and she said, and most of those years of your life, they are going to be years of good quality. You are going to enjoy quite a bit of your life. And that was even more astounding. And yes, I did the chemo and you know all about the chemo and things like that. And while I was having the chemo, I thought, right, well, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life, however short it may be, feeling sorry for myself. And so I started doing simple little things, such as I would get my breakfast. It was summer still, it was warm. I'd get my breakfast on a tray. I'd put a little table in some corner of my garden, and I would have breakfast there. It was just a different corner all the time, something different. And initially I thought, oh, this is crazy. But you know, as one of the presenters mentioned, you come out of yourself. You look at that, you see the caterpillar eating that plant and you do something. Something happened and I became, over time, it didn't come instantly, but over time, I became very fond of those mornings. And I developed a love of nature and I became closer to nature, something I couldn't do because I'd been working, I'd been doing this, that and the other. And frankly, I have a magpie now that sees me every morning. She wants a little bit of food often, but she will sing me a song every morning. In the summer, I connected with a water dragon. He'd been displaced from the house behind me, sought my home, and he then, I threw a blueberry to him, and now in the summer only because he hibernates, when he's there, he comes out and he seeks me out and he gets his 3 blueberries every morning. So that's something nice that I started doing. I also started having morning and afternoon teas. And for the first time, I used some of that lovely china I have stored in a cupboard and have never used. So things like that made me feel really good. Also, I began noticing my relationship with people, and I began to notice different things. Normally, you're pleased to see your children, you go and see your children, but my children were starting to do lovely things for me. When I was in hospital, my son came down from Queensland, he'd left his job, and he used to come in while I was in the hospital. He would bring me the lovely, not that I'm criticising hospital food, mind you, but he would bring me the most wonderful salads. He would always bring me delicatessen food. And I tell you what, it was lovely. And he took so much care and time out that I really felt that vindicated that my life had, that I meant something to someone, that I had made a difference. With my daughter, it was exactly the same. She was in Adelaide. She would we would constantly be in touch. We would video call. I saw the grandchildren. They would talk to me. We had a lovely, lovely time. My friends stepped up to the mark, and a lot of them did quite a lot for me. And I suddenly realized how lucky I was that there were so many people, because normally, my friends would ring, do you want to go here? Do you want to do that? Yes, you go and do that. But suddenly I became more mindful. I started thinking of that, and I am so grateful that I did, because it has been such a wonderful revelation to me how this world works. After all the chemos, then came the Avastin, which is, I suppose, another chemo in a way. And I noticed that although I was being infused regularly, every month I think it was, I was still having contact with the medical profession, and that was a real reassurance for me. However, there was less contact now than there had been before. And then when the Avastin stopped, that's when things really hit me, because I suddenly thought, what happens? What happens now? I'm on my own. Mind you, I did have, there were 3 monthly appointments and things, but it really became quite frightening for me. And I started feeling things here, there, and everywhere. And of course, it was my cancer coming back. And of course, I was going to die. And I would go through periods where I would bawl my eyes out. It was horrible. And then one day, I thought, well, I'm going to harness this overwhelming misery, and I'm going to do something about it. And my mother, before she died, she had asked all of her children to pick something that we would like as a remembrance of her, something special. And I picked a vase. And that, when I took that vase home after she died, I pulled out these awful dried flowers that were in it. And as I pulled it out, 2 $50 notes flew out and dropped at my feet. And I was so touched. I thought, here's my mother. She's gone, but she's still communicating. She has wanted to do something nice for me. And I thought, right, I will do the same thing for my children. But it wasn't going to be a vase. What I did, I started to write. I started to write them a letter. I was dreadfully miserable, but I did not want to put misery into my letters. So although they were very short, my letter is an ongoing letter. I might add 3 paragraphs or 2 paragraphs at a time, but they are filled with little reminiscences of the life I had when they were little children with them, of the things we used to do, of how much I appreciated something that they may have done for me now. So they're full of all these things that I want them to know. And these letters are ongoing, and every time I write them, I reread them, I bawl my eyes out, I go to bed. Next morning, I feel so much better because something positive has come out of that. The 3 monthly checkups were another thing that used to frighten me tremendously. I knew this was going to be the last positive one and something bad was going to happen. So I started doing things. When I had my blood tests, I was near a most wonderful fish shop. That was my prawn day. I would buy prawns because I had a real hankering for prawns. I would try to have an outing with a friend, or I would have a movie night or anything, or a meal at my house the night before, anything just to distract me for a while. And it helped. I couldn't be distracted all the time. When I lay down in bed, of course, I would think about what was ahead of me, but also there were thoughts of how pleasant the evening had been. At that time too, I joined the Ovarian Cancer Support Group, and that opened up my eyes so much, because in my ignorance, I knew all about the beginning of ovarian cancer, but I didn't know how I was going to die, what was going to happen, how could I work all this out? And so I thought, I want to talk to women who are going through this, and that's what I did do at the Ovarian Cancer Support Group. I was a little bit shy at first, but there were these women around a table, and it's a wonderful group. They had doctors would speak, they would have speakers who would tell you about the latest research, about trials that were going on, about exercise, etc. But also there was this little session where we would go around the table and you'd give a little synopsis about you, your treatment, your ovarian cancer. And I remember this was on the day that my first day, and I'll never forget this. The first lady to speak said, "Hello, my name is so-and-so. This is my 6th year with this illness." And I thought, 6 years, I've got a chance. I might be able to get to 6 years. It was such a revelation. And what she said was even more revealing. She said, "I went through all the treatment. Everything seemed to be fine. But then it wasn't too long and my cancer recurred." And I thought, her cancer recurred. And somehow in my brain, I thought, cancer recurs, you die, that's it. But it didn't. And she then spoke about she had to have her liver operated on. Obviously, the whole operation must have been terrible. But it took her time. She got through it, and she is fine and living really well. Then the next lady spoke. She was stage 1, and that's when stages became something that I do now concentrate on. This lady said she was 17 years and doing well. So I was so impressed. And I thought, my goodness, all this Google doctor business that I'd been going through hadn't led me to believe this at all. And so then came another person who'd obviously just heard her diagnosis. And I could feel for her the anguish in her voice as she told us. It was terrible. And I just wanted to hug her. And then we went to the next person and the next. And there were very many good pieces of advice, and people will tell you their story, and sometimes something resonates with you and you think, yes, I can use that. I can maybe go here and get that sorted, or maybe I can try this and maybe that will help me. I just found that so amazing, and I have made some really good friends there. And then, of course, come Christmas, last Christmas, my cancer recurred. And it frightened me, but of course the tumours are now gone. I've had my second, but I've had chemo again. It certainly wasn't as easy as the first time round because I did not suffer very much from that. The tumours are now gone. My condition has stabilised. I really don't know how long I've got, but I do know this. I could have died right at the beginning. But these last 5 years that I have had, yes, grief and uncertainty have certainly been a part of my life, but there has been so much more. And even though I would dearly love to be rid of this cancer, I can say that I would not have missed these last 5 years for anything in the world. There has been so much goodness and happiness there. And I hope that I wish you all the very best on your journeys. I hope you do find happiness to some degree, or as much as you possibly can, and that you will find as much laughter, love, joy, affection, beauty that I have found. So I wish you all well. And now I'll hand you back to Vanessa. Thank you.
Wow, Andrea, what can I say? I could have listened to you speak all night. You can just keep going. That was absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for giving us such a raw and real insight, into your journey and how you've managed over the years. And I know everyone really appreciates you being so open and willing to share your story. And I think your positivity would have rubbed off onto everyone listening. So a big, big thank you. We have one question. Someone has asked, in the moments where you do feel the most down, what do you do to pick yourself up?
Well, I did mention that I write when I'm crying, and I do cry. There are moments where I'm very bleak. That's when I write those letters. And I just can't pull myself out of it straight away. But the next morning, I already begin to feel better, and I make sure that I do something. I get out of the house, I might go for a walk, I have that breakfast outside. I just force myself to go through the various steps, and invariably it eases off. And that's basically what I do.
Fantastic. You really are an inspiration. So once again, thank you so much just for being so open and honest and sharing your story with us. Thank you very much. So there are no more questions, so we will leave it there. Once again, I'd like to say a big thank you to our speakers, Angela Jones, Dr. Charlotte Topman, and Andrea Leslie. We really appreciate the information that you've shared, the advice that you've given, and of course the time that you've given us this evening. I'd like to thank everyone for being on the webinar, and we do hope that you found it valuable. The recording of this webinar will be posted on the OCA website over the coming weeks, and you'll receive an email with a link to the recording in the next few days. In a moment, you'll be redirected to an evaluation form. If you could just take 2 minutes to fill that in, we'd really appreciate it. It does help us to plan for future webinars. If you have any questions that you would like addressed, please don't hesitate to contact our information and support line on 1300 660 334. This is obviously a very challenging time for everyone, and we know some of you might feel that you need that extra support, so please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you again, everyone. We do hope to see you for our next webinar in a couple of months. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and goodbye.